You founded FlightAware and you grew the company to the largest aviation data platform in the world. When was the moment you knew this is going to be something really big?
One of the reasons FlightAware was successful because we were unusual in how we did things. Part of the thinking was doing it differently and being disruptive is the key to success. It doesn't matter if you're a 3-person company or 300-person. I think treat people the way that you want to be treated yourself. Don't lie to your customers. You'd be amazed how many companies they don't have those kind of principles.
Aviators, welcome to the Flight Club podcast. I'm your host, Jason Middleton. I'm a pilot, I'm an aviation entrepreneur, and I'm a huge fan of the people that make up our diverse aviation community. Today's guest on Flight Club is an aviation entrepreneur whose work has arguably affected more people in the world than just about anyone other than maybe the Wright brothers. He's an accomplished multi-engine commercial pilot. He's an active CFI. He holds a single pilot type rating in the CJ2. Most of his flying career has been spent flying around the mountains of Colorado. He's a member of the Texas Aviation Hall of Fame. He's been a software engineer as long as he's been a pilot. He's a regular on CNBC, CNN, and Squawk Box as an aviation expert. He's an advocate for safety, serving as the Aspen Airport Safety Task Force. He's a massive aviation enthusiast, and he founded a little company called FlightAware. Aviators, welcome to the podcast, Daniel Baker.
Thank you so much for having me. This is great. And I appreciate what you're doing to make aviation more available to people and put this out on the internet and have people get engaged and learn more about what's going on in the industry.
Oh, thanks, Daniel. Well, thank you again for being on the Flight Club podcast. We're just getting started with this, and it's all about having just the bringing the community of aviation together, not just pilots, but people who have really made a difference in aviation. And you're kind of one of these people that have made a massive difference in aviation. And I when I was getting ready for this episode, I was learning so much about you, and it dawned on me, this guy is the Mark Zuckerberg of aviation.
Well, I appreciate that. I think my only concern is, he's starting to learn to fly, and so he could quickly become the Mark Zuckerberg of aviation, and I don't know where that would leave me.
No, he could be the Daniel Baker of software. How about that?
He could be the Daniel Baker of social media.
There you go. So we're here to talk about a lot of things, aviation, but one of the arguably the thing that you've done in aviation, in the aviation community, has impacted more people than just about anything else. You founded FlightAware, and I want to hear a little bit about. I think you started when you were 22 years old.
Yeah, that sounds right. Yep.
Yeah. So young age, just getting started. When did you realize that something like this needed to happen?
Well, I think like a lot of successful businesses, it started because I was trying to solve a problem that I had. So I was a private pilot flying around in a Cessna 182 and wanted friends and family to know where I was I going to be on time, when should we meet at the airport? And this sort of technology was available if you were flying on the airlines. And so I knew that data was sort of out there. And so it began as a hobby project to solve that problem. And what was surprising to me was I had envisioned that there were a lot of other people that I thought were like me. So private pilots, owner-operators, these sorts of folks who would benefit from this technology. But I can't say that I saw the vision that it would be impacting the world of aviation.
Oh, interesting. And so you started it because you wanted your friends and family, to follow you, which is how people use it a lot today. My wife tracks me everywhere I go. Whenever I'm on an airplane, she knows where I've landed before I know, and it's just through FlightAware.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that surprised me about that is I had always envisioned that if there was a given flight, there'd probably be one or two people that are interested in tracking that flight, which is true, but I didn't expect that. As you get into business aviation and corporate aviation and charter, there are potentially 20, 30, 40, 50 people who are interested in that flight. Whether, you have the operator, you have the FBOs on both sides, you have the director of maintenance, you have charter brokers, you have the friends and family of not only the passengers, but also the folks who are meeting them at the other end. You have the family of the crew. And so I think the opportunity was larger than I saw, because at the time we looked at how many flights are there in the U.S. in the day? And I think it was something like 50,000 a day was sort of our ballpark. And so we never could really contemplate that the market size for 50,000 flights in the U.S. per day could be in the hundreds of thousands or could be in the millions. And so the impact was definitely, and the demand was definitely bigger than I had anticipated.
When was the moment you knew this was going to be something really big?
It was, well, I call it an overnight success after 20 years. So there was,
That's how most successful businesses start.
yeah, there was a lot of grinding there. And I don't know that there was a clear time when I knew it was going to be big, but I have this one memory that I can recall, which was in the fall of 2006, we decided to exhibit at a big trade show. This is National Business Aviation Association, so NBAA. Has a big event every year. I'd say tens of thousands of people, thousands of exhibitors. It's a big, big industry event. And so up until that point, FlightAware I'd been running out of my apartment on a folding table, and it had been a website. I had created this word, and I knew people were using the website, but I didn't really understand the business, and we weren't a real commercial offering yet. But we got some branding together, and we built a trade show, and we went out to this event, and we set up. And at first, it could be a little intimidating. You look around, there's thousands of exhibitors. These are big companies that have deep roots in the industry and clearly are more prepared with a team of 60 salespeople at the event. And it was me and a handful of friends who were going to represent FlightAware. So the very first day we walk in, we go stand in the booth, and we are slammed from opening to closing. Everyone who walks by, who wasn't necessarily looking for us, they're just walking the trade show floor, sees the FlightAware brand, walks over, says hi, tells a story about how they use it, has an idea, has a request. Everyone knew who we were. And so that for me was where it pivoted from, this is a website that I'm running out of my apartment, to this is something that people are using, that has opportunity, that we can create something with to help the industry. And so I don't think I'll ever forget that moment when it pivoted from a thing on the internet to the thing in the real world. And obviously it was the same thing, but to experience that the way I did was pretty impactful.
Yeah, and when I use FlightAware, and we use it in our business every single day. I mean, not only do I use it personally, but the software that we use uses it. Yeah. And I think we probably have 3 or 4 different connections with FlightAware just in our work. It's so rare. Tell me about, do you miss the days, like the startup days, the grindy entrepreneurial startup days, working out of your apartment?
Yeah, totally. And I think to stay happy and healthy, you have to reset your expectations about that, because it was so fun to come up with an idea for a feature, sit down, start banging it out, get it working well enough, just push it live to the website without any testing. Tens of thousands of people are using it, because you realize how big the impact is. And it feels great to do something small and have it be a big impact. Flash forward 10 or 15 years, and we have a team of engineers who all of whom are way smarter, more capable than me, who have an incredibly complex process, and there's nothing so immediate, and you can have an idea or you can champion it, but no one's going to single-handedly bring something from idea to execution. And so that can feel a little bit like you've gone from nimble startup to huge, corporation. But if you change your mindset to, I can have an even bigger impact than the feature that goes to 10,000 people, which is we can come up with something that can affect tens of millions of airline travelers, or we can impact this entire industry, or we can save all these people time and money. The downside is it's not as quick, right? You're not going from idea to execution in the span of 2 hours, but in the state of the size of the industry, to go from idea to we have an airline launch customer in 6 months or 9 months or something, and that in the aviation industry, that's unheard of. Right. So that's fun to see, and then you continue to see that, which is you go to United Airlines gate and you see a FlightAware map on the screen, and that's impacting people in ways that I couldn't even make a full list of
How does that make you feel? Like wherever you go, you see it affects, especially when you travel, a product that you thought of, developed, launched, put out in the world, and grown is everywhere in the world now, and more people. Yeah. I want to learn more about how big it is, and maybe we could segue into that a little bit right now. But sure. It's everywhere. How does that make you feel?
It's awesome, and I don't think I'm ever going to know what it feels like to be a famous artist or musician who goes into a restaurant or a bar and they're playing your song. It's not in the cards for me, but I think I know what that feels like, which is you walk into an FBO, you walk into baggage claim, you walk to an airline gate and you see FlightAware times and maps and data up there, And you realize people have chosen this because they like it.
Yeah.
People are looking at this because it helps them out in some way or they enjoy it. And so I think that feels really good, knowing that it's not something people have to do or need to or dealing with because it's the nature of something, but because they think this is the best thing out there, let's put that up on the screen for everybody to enjoy. And so that feels really good.
That's pretty cool. Like, I know you're not going to be a famous rock star, but it's got to be that same feeling when you are an up and coming musician and you hear your song on the radio for the first time. You're like, it's got to be that similar feeling. But
it is, because you make it I made up the word FlightAware, and then I'm driving to work and I hear on NPR on Morning Edition they say FlightAware like it's a real thing. And then you kind of realize, oh, it is.
It's kind of a real thing.
It is kind of a real thing. Yeah, exactly. And so it shows how quickly things can go from idea to existing and impacting. So that feels good.
So you guys, you grew the company to the largest aviation data platform in the world.
Yep.
And it impacts, like I said in the opening, it impacts just about more people than anything else in aviation. I mean, you have Boeing, one of the biggest companies in aviation, but FlightAware actually touches more people than Boeing does. That's kind of a big thing. Like, tell me about who's using it, how they're using it, and kind of the size of your users and where it is right now.
Yeah. So in terms of folks who are directly using FlightAware's website and FlightAware's mobile apps, that's in the low tens of millions of the number of distinct users in a given month. Probably 200 something airlines are using the technology, much in the way you described for Silver Air, where they're hooking into it in different ways, a couple thousand FBOs and airports. But I think the bigger impact is, as you were talking about Silver Air, all the people who are using that data in some other way. And so, for example, if you pull up the Delta Airlines app on your phone, those ETAs and some of that data is from FlightAware. So that's impacting a tremendous number of people. And that's true of tons of airlines around the world. And that's how people are getting their data. So I don't even think I can quantify the impact, but I think it's safe to say the majority of airline passengers are using FlightAware directly or indirectly. I think the vast majority in business aviation are using it directly or indirectly. And then there's cargo, there's defense, there's all these other ways that it's being used. And then you can get into the analytical space. How are people figuring out where they should base their next maintenance facility? We're going to consider bidding on this FBO opportunity, and using the data to analyze it. So it's impacting really big decisions beyond just what time should I leave for the airport.
When did you realize that there was that whole business unit side of it, outside of just the tracking capabilities, the analytics, and all the things you just mentioned? These are really important. It's a really important data for people to make business decisions, right? If they're where should we put up a new route, for example?
Yeah,
right?
well,
for an airline.
I think it goes to show the importance of staying connected to the product. And what I mean by that is, in the very, very early days of FlightAware, one of the co-founders, my friend David McNett, said, what FlightAware needs is a phone number. And I said, no. You can't call Google, you can't call Facebook, internet sites don't have phone numbers. And he said, got it, I'm getting a phone number and I'm routing it to your cell phone. It's like, okay, great. Because I was already doing the development, doing the sales, doing all this. And so when he had it set up so that when it was a call to the FlightAware number, it would indicate that, as opposed to just being a normal call, so I could answer it more professionally. And it wasn't after a day or two after he posted the phone number on the website that I'm answering, hey, FlightAware. And people are saying, hey, I'm working on this project for X, Y, Z. And people were just calling, wanting answers to questions with the information. And so, we didn't really have a method to do this. So I had to say, okay, for $250, I'll answer that question for $500. And I would have to.
How did you come up with that number, Daniel? Come on.
Yeah, you just make it up until people stop saying yes. But that was part of the thing, which is I started to get busier and busier because I had all these things I needed to do to build FlightAware, and then people are having me build these Excel reports for them. I'm like, oh, wow, I'm going to be up all night working on your Excel project. But it was helping them out and they were paying. But so I kept, saying it's going to cost more and more money, and people were happy to pay for it. And you start to realize if you're going to build some huge facility, if you're going to be moving people, if you're, building out a flight department FBO, $1,000 to help inform that decision, the ROI on that is tremendous. But it felt good because it was clear to me that it was helping the business. It was making them more efficient, saving time and money, and paying the super early bills for FlightAware. So that was really needed revenue. But that direct exposure to the customers was super helpful to understand. I think if I had been like in a back room and we had taken a ton of investment and had 100 employees right away, and someone had told me, oh, people are wanting Excel files on something, I don't know that it would have resonated the same way as speaking with them directly on the phone, having them explain what their problem was and what information they were seeking and what they needed to figure out.
Yeah. It's, we use a software for our flight operations, and the founder of the company is in our office at least once a year watching how we use it. And I totally admire him for that, because he's really wants to know how the customer is using the product.
Yeah, every I would go twice a year to all of our big customers, quite a few. It's traveling all the time. And it was a combination of reporting everything the company had done since I'd last seen them, reporting how we'd done on their feedback. So we're actually listening. I'm not just giving everybody the same presentation, showing them the roadmap and then getting their opinion on the roadmap. Yeah. And so not only is that great, because first of all, you're getting really smart people's feedback on what you're doing. 2 is you're never going to lose a customer if you're in their office constantly. And 3 is it created huge opportunities that we didn't always envision. And in fact, what I would do with big airline customers is when we were starting to work on a feature, I'd start explaining to them what we're doing, giving them a sense of it, so that when we got to the point of the sales cycle, it wasn't introducing something new to them. I had already kind of piqued their interest. And the sales cycle with airlines is long, like years. And I can recall going to Southwest Airlines, I think it was the summer of 2019, August, September of 2019, and showing them this kind of proof of concept pre-beta we had on predictive ETAs. Long story short, it was in production 6 months later with them. Yeah. And the reason was it was such a positive impact to them, and they were so excited about it. But it goes to show, you don't know what you're going to get out of a meeting. You have to be present. You have to be willing to seek an outcome that you don't know necessarily what it is. But you can't get that sitting by yourself at home.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought up the ETAs, because it is shocking how accurate FlightAware is on. It could be a 17-hour flight from LAX to Singapore, and it literally gets there within 5-10 minutes of the predicted time.
I think it's typically better than 5 or 10 minutes. And so Singapore Changi Airport is a customer for ETAs, as well as a number of airlines that operate that route. And it's a super smart team at FlightAware of data scientists who have taken petabytes of data. So a petabyte is 1,024 terabytes, and a terabyte is 1,024 gigabytes. So this is a lot of data. And basically said, okay, we have decades of data on how airplanes operate, and it can use that in a kind of machine learning model to take the real-time data and then predict the outcome. And what we learned was, previous to FlightAware, the sort of manual or algorithmic predictions were good plus or minus 15 minutes. You might think, well, that's pretty good. But realistically, plus or minus 15 minutes means a 30-minute window. Mm-hmm. And so let's say you've got a flight coming into a gate, another airplane going from that gate, and you've got 2 plus or minus 30 minutes. You can't make a decision on that, on an hour of time difference. If you can get that down to 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, suddenly the airlines are able to make decisions about gate allocations, about crew assignments, about swapping out airplanes, about holding planes for connecting passengers. And so that huge improvement in the times actually made it way more useful to them.
So is it fair for me to assume that if we get to a gate and we're on an airline, we taxi in, and they say, hey, we're 45 minutes delay into our gate because there's another, is it safe to blame you directly for that?
So if it improved your travel, then it's because of me. If it caused a problem, then I don't know who screwed that up. But we are working. Actually, there is some cool stuff going on with, they call that an unmet, which is when the airplane gets to the gate and it's not met and able to go into the gate. And so this is, as someone who's flown airlines a massive amount, I can find these opportunities. And so one thing that we were able to do was go back 10 or 20 years, how would an airline identify a lot of unmets? What's the difference between a flight arriving on time and a flight arriving 45 minutes early, sitting at the gate for a while, and then blocking in? Statistically, it looks the same. And so FlightAware is actually able to use ADS-B on the ground to identify the amount of time between when the airplane gets within some distance of the gate and when it actually is marked as arrived at the gate. And so if you can start to say, okay, this gate all the time has this problem, or this airport, or this time of day. And so not only is there the operational element that FlightAware is helping with, but from a reporting perspective, it helps airlines identify places or times or types of airplanes or flights that are really disproportionately unmet. And then it lets them use that as a metric to improve it, because it's a terrible experience for the passengers. And it drives me crazy, because I like to say, okay, there's 200 people on this airplane, right? And so in 5 minutes, we've wasted over 1,000 man minutes of just human existence.
You're way too smart, Daniel.
And so it drives me crazy.
Doing research on FlightAware, and I kind of did a pretty deep dive on it. And one thing that I thought was really cool was the misery map.
Yeah.
And this was an internal thing for you guys. And I when you were talking about it, I'm like, oh my God, this makes so much sense. How often does a misery map go into effect?
The misery map is actually an interesting story about it, because particularly the early days of FlightAware was all about transparency to data and showing you all this, all these times and all these statistics. And it really put a lot of onus on the person. And if you're a power user, like at Silver Air, people are all over it all the times and what it all means. And we actually had a really, really smart guy. He was an intern. His name's David Chenard, who had this different perspective on usability and on the user experience. And he kept saying, FlightAware shouldn't be so complicated. There should be a way that you can step back and get this big picture of what's going on. And so the misery map was actually an intern sort of hobby project that he pitched and built all the way to execution. And so it's one of the things at FlightAware that I can say I didn't have any involvement in from the idea all the way through. And it was so different from the way FlightAware operated. I thought, okay, that's cool, but that's not really what FlightAware's about, but I think it's a great feature. But to your point, it's tremendously popular. Yeah. And so the misery map gets pushed when there are big weather events, particularly winter weather events, big events.
What about events like Super Bowl?
Super Bowl, absolutely. Yeah. And what's amazing to me is, if you check they do the weather on the Today Show, and they show the misery map. It's just part of
really cool.
the experience. You get in elevators in any high rise, and they have the misery map in there. And so not only is it cool that it's helpful, but I think that helps me continue to want to embrace ideas outside of what I would normally find to be useful and helpful to people. So that was an interesting experience.
There's a lot of different uses for FlightAware and this technology, and there's this kind of this new thing that exists in the world because of FlightAware. I mean, you could call it the FlightAware effect. What were some surprise uses of the software that you didn't see coming?
Well, I think human ingenuity will, find ways to use anything for things that you didn't expect, because people are all so different. And I think I can probably think of some examples, but I would say the biggest surprise to me was when I started FlightAware, it was clear that general aviation, so Cessnas and Bonanzas and Cirrus and stuff, didn't have a great way to do flight tracking. But if you had asked me back then, is there a use case for this at a large 135 operator that operates globally? Do the world's largest airlines need this? I would have said no. That's not something that I envision is needed, and I don't know how they can get value out of it. And so I think the biggest surprise to me was how much disruption we could have caused in the industry. And I mean that in a good way, positive, constructive disruption to impact travelers with decision making at airlines. I think I would have thought both that was handled and just too out of touch for what the kind of the scale of FlightAware, which was for most of its existence at this point a sub 100 person company. It's probably closer to 200 now, but we're talking dozens of people impacting tens or hundreds of millions. I think that's probably the biggest surprise.
That's cool. I mean, there's there's a lot of things that we deal with in the business that I'm in, the Part 135 corporate jet world. Yeah. And flying celebrities and big politicians and very very public figures, and the tracking of these public figures is a thing.
Yeah.
It's in the media, and like, what are your thoughts on, there's a ton of examples of this, but I just kind of want to get your kind of thoughts on tracking of flights that maybe aren't, should or should not be tracked.
Yeah, I would say that since the very beginning of FlightAware, that's been a needle that we've had to thread, which is, if the company's goal is to be transparent about flight information and help people with all of this, that is at odds with the fact that I believe people have a fundamental right to privacy and to be able to travel without everybody knowing about it. And so FlightAware has always been really good about, if you don't want your airplane on there or you don't want a flight on there, you can call up for free, get it off, and have some privacy there. The thing that's happened since then is the technology has evolved quite a bit. And so it used to be that you had to get the data from government and then they could put these stipulations in place to mostly keep it under control. Over time, now airplanes are broadcasting their positions, and hobbyists can get access to data, and it can create some drama around that.
Yeah, the hobbyists are getting really sophisticated on how they, like Taylor Swift, right? During the Super Bowl this year, her, first of all, she didn't even use her airplane. I don't know why. She's been, she was doing a lot of flying around that. She kind of famously owns a couple of airplanes, and but she was using a charter operator to handle some flights. Particularly, she was trying to get from Tokyo to the Super Bowl in a very short window of time, and it was all over the news. I mean, they showed her landing in LAX in the Global Express and then positioning to Vegas, and I mean, it was on all over the media. And this is not known. Like, she's flying on an airplane that's not hers.
Yeah.
That was chartered by somebody that is not in her name. Yet these people find out, they figure it out.
Yeah.
And they're getting really sophisticated.
Yeah, I think the argument that they would make is that, hey, this is public information. You're operating in the national airspace system. This is all data that's out there, and we're just making it available. There's some truth to that. By the same token, I drive around in a car with the license plate, and you could follow me around all day, every day, and be announcing and broadcasting. And was that legal? Yeah, you have the absolute right to that. I have no expectation legally of privacy in public. Yeah. But in our society, right, there is some expectation of that. And then I think, in the Taylor Swift example, I believe that she not only has that expectation, rightfully so, but she has some legitimate security concerns as well. Yeah. And so FlightAware has been a huge proponent of what can be done to address that. And so from a technology standpoint, I've been working with FAA and NBAA and others to work out ways that airplanes can, without impacting safety, be more anonymous as they're emitting their position, as they're traversing the national airspace system. And it's complicated because you're now talking about changing regulation and changing how transponders work and those sorts of things. And so it's been a longer road than I would have liked, but we're making progress there. But it's tricky too, because as it relates to her, and you made the point, this isn't her airplane, this isn't anything associated with her. When you reach that level of celebrity, it's difficult to ever be not spotted, right?
It is.
And it's not really the aviation piece necessarily that is what's exposing the travel. And I think particularly if people know your origin and destination, it's hard to hide in plain sight operating a large aircraft, transcontinental.
Really is. I mean, how many flights are going from Tokyo to California minutes after the show ends?
Yeah, that's right.
It is. I mean, and like we at my company, we operate under a company call sign. And it's a discrete call sign. The public doesn't know it, but they figure it out. And if we're flying a series of flights, we'll actually change the call sign. Every airplane has a unique call sign, and we'll change it throughout the flight just to throw people off.
Yeah, and you guys have the advantage that there isn't a one-to-one association between one of your airplanes and an individual, right? And so that's why you're seeing people use these types of services. As it relates to people who have a one-to-one relationship, we're working on a way that the airplane can get not only a unique call sign every single flight, but a unique transponder code so that the transponder isn't broadcasting the tail number as well. And so I think the future state of what this is going to look like in 10 or 20 years is when you get your clearance, like your pre-departure clearance on your iPad, and you're about to uplink it through Bluetooth or Wi-Fi or whatever to the airplane, it will also include a unique flight ID, transponder code, etc., so that every single flight by every single airplane is pseudo-anonymous to the public, but it's still broadcasting its position, it's participating in radar. And then FlightAware will have these associations and these codes so that as the operator, you can look at your fleet as if it's operating normally under the call signs and tail numbers that you would expect. So I think that's the future state. It's just getting all of the regulators globally on board with this. It's getting all of the avionics manufacturers on board with this, and it's not a quick process.
So when you started, I want to talk a little bit about the entrepreneurial side of this. I started my business 16 years ago now, and I know what it's like to start a little company and grow it. And when you started your company, you're working out of your apartment, with a few users. Your mom and a few friends are using the product, and now it impacts such a huge market. What was it? Tell me about that journey, just really quickly. Like, I know it's a very broad question, but starting the organization and then being the founding CEO and the running the big organization CEO are very different people. Yeah. How did you kind of navigate that growth?
Well, yeah, that was challenging.
And I mean, like on a personal level, right? Yeah. Like your mindset. How did you handle that?
Yeah, it goes through ebbs and flows. I think surrounding yourself with great people and getting great expertise is important. I think that I can kind of recall in the early days of FlightAware, one of the reasons FlightAware was successful because we were unusual in how we did things. It was on the internet. Things didn't require a contract. It was just more accessible than most stuff in aviation. And so counterparts in Silicon Valley, part of the thinking was doing it differently and being disruptive is the key to success. And as a result, we kind of applied that to everything. And I thought, for example, that not having HR, not having a legal team, not having a finance team was helping the company grow faster by not having all of these, corporate things that harsh the vibe and make it not fun and innovative. Yeah. And then I'm finding, I'm really bogged down with all of these, legal affairs and finance issues and whatnot, and starting to bring on really experienced, competent people that have that background, but also, this is the hard part, understand the vision and culture of a small startup. Suddenly you realize, we can have a general counsel who is massively accelerating things. We can have HR that's now we're hitting all of our hiring goals and people are way happier. And so those sorts of things were helpful. And then one of the other co-founders, Carl Leonbauer, would constantly say, what got you here won't get you there.
Right.
And he made it clear, and he's absolutely right, you constantly need to be reinventing yourself. And that not only is really shrewd advice and a good thing to keep in mind, because you need to recognize that you can't be the same person, but also every single day I was doing a job I'd never done before, meaning I had never run a 4-year, 217-day-old company. I'd done 4 years, 216 days, but not 217. And so every day I was in uncharted waters. And so kind of keeping those things all together of starting to really rely on people that could add a lot of value that were from outside of sort of the startup culture, to recognizing you were going to have to reinvent yourself. And then also just giving yourself a little bit of a break, which is, I've never seen this before, I've never done this before. But if you have some core principles that you can always apply, it works out, which is, it doesn't matter if you're a 3-person company or 300-person, I think treat people the way that you want to be treated yourself. Don't lie to your customers. These sorts of very simple principles, I think, will get you pretty far. And you'd be amazed how many companies, they don't have those kind of principles, right?
I always tell my team, like, this is the biggest company I've ever worked at, so I don't have answers to all the problems, but we're gonna give it a shot. We're always trying new things at Silver Air, right? we're not the company that just like, this is the way we've been doing it for 30 years, so this is how we're going to continue to do it. We're always trying to reinvent, and change is hard too. I've experienced a lot of change management with my team, and I think the software world's probably maybe a little bit more adaptable to change, but aviation is not one of those businesses that likes change. We like things
Right.
the way, and it's been a little tough for me.
For
to
good reason,
navigate.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that made FlightAware very unusual, which is, like I think Facebook, I think Zuckerberg famously had the kind of motto, move fast and break things.
Yeah.
And aviation is just the polar opposite, right? And I think that's smart.
Yeah.
And so FlightAware was kind of threading that needle, which was we wanted to be this rapidly evolving, innovative startup company, but also we wanted the world's largest aircraft operators to rely on us. And I think it was difficult to achieve, but it was doable, and it was done.
You did a good job.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
It's overnight success for 20 years.
Yeah, exactly.
Good job.
A few overnights.
What came first for you? Aviation? Your fascination with aviation, or technology? Let's talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, I had always loved computers ever since I was a little kid. Mm-hmm. And played with that from a super young age, and had a job when I was a teenager at an internet service provider, and just absolutely loved it and wanted to be around it. And at the same time, I had loved aviation, but as an outsider. Mm-hmm. And so like I can recall every year we'd go see my some family in upstate New York, and so we flew there, and there were no nonstop flights to Syracuse. And so you'd typically fly like Newark or Philadelphia or something like that. And then I think the highlight for me was you'd get on like a Brasilia or some kind of like turboprop airplane, which not only is a little more of a raw aviation experience, but at least in those days, you would get to walk on the ramp and walk up the stairs. And I'm pretty sure we got to pick our seats in some cases because the flights weren't very full. So I would try to get in the front row, which also at 12 I thought was in first class. So this is like a win-win for me. And I don't think there was a cockpit door. And it was an opportunity to get involved in that space. But I didn't really know how to go from I love flying on this and kind of seeing it all come together and seeing all the symphony of ground service and air traffic control and all that come together. And I think it was in middle school, I was a pretty terrible student. And this was very distressing to my parents, as you can imagine, particularly because they're both academics. And, I can recall my mom came back from her hairdresser and said, well, I was talking about you, which means probably stressing out that I hadn't done like any homework all year or something. Yeah. And it turns out her hairdresser's husband had an airplane and offered that he would take me up for a ride. And they worked out some arrangement where if I got something on my report card that was good, I think in both grades and conduct, because I was bad in both of them.
Really?
That I would get a ride on his airplane. And this was my first time to really be exposed to it. We went to a general aviation airport. We got in this Piper Cherokee class airplane, I think, did a cross country. I saw FBO on the other end. And that's when I knew I wasn't even aware that existed, and I wasn't even aware that regular people like me could get involved in it. And so I think that was always something that was in the back of my mind. And so for the next several years, I had done startups and .coms in different types of space, but it wasn't until FlightAware that I realized, oh, wow, I can do the two things that I love at the same time, which is technology and aviation. And so for me, that was the biggest breakthrough, is realizing that if you can basically get paid to do something that you love anyway and would do for free, then that's you really can't get any better than that. And so the technology for a long time, but being able to pair it with aviation has just been extraordinary.
Well, so this is an aviation podcast, and you are a pilot, so I think we should talk about flying a little bit.
Let's do it, yeah.
So
you won't get me to stop.
Yeah, no. So so you're a pretty accomplished pilot. You fly around a jet, single pilot, in the mountains of Colorado. You're doing some pretty complex flying, but let's back up a little bit. Where did you learn to fly? Tell me about your first solo.
Yeah, so I was living in Austin, Texas, and I had always wanted to fly because I'd become aware of this, but didn't know how to take the next steps. And again, I think this is still a problem today of going from I'm interested in it to I'm sitting in an airplane. AOPA had an ad campaign called, I think, 1-800-BE-A-PILOT.
Yeah,
and
I think I remember.
Yeah, you call them up and leave a voicemail, and then they mail you a list of nearby flight schools.
Yeah.
And so I went to the airport and signed up, and just immediately loved it. It was everything that I expected, and so that's where
did you go straight through? Get your private?
No, I think instrument? I did. I got my private right away, and then pretty quickly moved on to instrument, which is when that inspired FlightAware. because suddenly when you're in the IFR system, right, in the air traffic control system, you start to become a little bit more aware, and you're recognizing that these flight plans I'm filing are going into the national airspace system. So I did that, and then I think ironically, the more I got involved in FlightAware, the less I was flying for quite a while. And then the flying didn't really start going again until traveling for work was a necessity, and needing to be all over all the time, and where the limitation was not so much, oh, if we only had a customer to go see, it was we have 16 that we need to go see in the next 2 weeks. And so that changed it too, because before it was really flying for fun and flying to sightseeing, kind of creating trips to get some flying in, and
$100 hamburger.
Exactly, yeah. And so that's a different type of flying versus we need to do this 14 leg trip, and there's a lot more going on. And so that not only taught me a lot about flying, but it also gave me opportunities to create new products for FlightAware, because you start to see the logistics that large operators like yourselves see, trying to do a lot of legs in a day and dealing with all the things that come up for operating airplanes.
That's great that you had that early experience. And did you I love the instrument rating? To me, was still my favorite rating I've ever done. I just had so much fun with it, and
it's the most practical, right? Because a lot of the stuff that you're doing in the private commercial are maneuvers to demonstrate competency in the airplane, but they're not things that you normally do. Like you don't go do a chandelle, right? Or eights on pylons or something like that. I think it's important that they had those, but the instrument felt like I was training to actually do a specific thing, as opposed to do something to prove that I'm capable of flying. I
remember my first instrument approach. I did all my training at Santa Monica Airport, and I was by myself, my first actual IFR instrument approach by myself on the airplane to a full stop landing. I was it was one of the coolest experiences I've ever had.
It all comes together.
It was a VOR approach with VOR cross points. It was a pain in the ass to fly, but it was just awesome. I'll never forget it.
Yeah, I can sort of recall mine. I recall mine as well. And what was funny to me is when you're doing instrument training, you do a lot of flying. I think it's 40 hours of instrument flying. It's almost under the hood, and you're doing all these approaches. And so you're 4 miles from here, maintain 2,000 still established, cleared ILS, whatever. You heard this a million times. And I can recall flying in the clouds. I probably only had my instrument rating for a month or something, and I heard that familiar ILS clearance for the very first time and realized, oh my gosh, this is the real thing.
They're talking to me.
Yeah, and we're not doing this for fun. It's literally low ceiling, and of course to them it's just completely another day in the office as an air traffic controller.
You're like
right?
Student pilot, just
Yeah, exactly. And so, but the first time you hear that for real, and you hit approach mode, and you're in green needles and all that, and it works out. The runway's right where it should be every time. So it's a good feeling.
You have a lot of experience in the mountains, and we've all flown to Aspen as corporate jet pilots, and we've done all this, but a lot of people don't have this experience flying in the mountains. It's a unique kind of flying with unique challenges and not a lot of escape plans. And talk to me about when you first started flying in the mountains and some of the things that you learned and
I think the biggest thing that people learn right away, beyond how variable the weather is how serious density altitude is. And it doesn't matter if you have a normally aspirated Cessna 150 or a G650. Right, there's markedly less air up there. The engine performance is way worse. There's way less, essentially air mass going over the wings, and recognizing that and factoring that into your decision making is tough, because you have this baseline of what the airplane can do and the performance, and suddenly that's changed. And then you add an Aspen where you have that combined with the fact that a lot of times you're going to be doing tailwind landings and takeoffs because of the terrain constraints. And those two things add up to be tremendous. And so I go to flight safety twice a year, once for my mandatory currency as a Part 91 pilot, but then also once to essentially knock the rust off and get proficient on stuff. And I always do a lot of Aspen operations. And it is eye-opening to do whether it be a rejected takeoff right before V1 or a climb out when you're hot, heavy, and high, to see how much more challenging that is, how, what the margin looks like.
Yeah.
And so for me, I think training is a huge factor in that and being proficient. But then the other is to recognize when you're flying in and out of the mountains, and Aspen in particular, that the weather and the airport dictate your schedule, not the other way around. Yeah. And so when we go in there, it's not, oh, we're going to be there at 1 o'clock on Tuesday. We're going to shoot for 1 o'clock on Tuesday. It may be Monday morning. It may be Wednesday evening.
Yeah.
So we add a day or two on both sides for weather.
Or you may end up in rifle.
Absolutely, yeah. And so the key is to not make really firm plans and to be flexible. Yeah. And you just have to set the expectation of, hey, we're going to try to be on time. We're going to try to go, but you can't force it, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're just taking all these risk factors. And sometimes you're going to end up another airport and drive. Sometimes you're going to end up another airport, get some fuel, have lunch, wait for something to clear and go. But you need to set the expectation that it's plus or minus 48 hours. You're not setting the schedule there.
Yeah. So you have a unique perspective. You're single pilot type rated in the CJ, which I am as well. That's how I started my company, single, just flying around to CJ by myself. And there's a lot of people like you or aspire to be like you and that do the type of flying that you do, right? But there's a lot of challenges with it too. And I think there's some real challenges, and I think some are just perceived. We've seen a lot of single pilot jet operators getting turned down for insurance. For example, the insurance companies they've really been hard on guys like you, fly your jet, single pilot.
Right.
But the data doesn't suggest that the data suggests you're more safe than a professionally flown CJ with 2 pilots in it. Have you talk about your decision making around, you mentioned a few things, weather and how you approach the single pilot jet operations?
Yeah, I think my mindset's pretty similar to a lot of folks, which is why it has the safety, which is number one, you have flexibility around schedule. And the other that I think is important is acknowledging that flying a jet, particularly single pilot, is a professional full-time job. And so if you can wake up and say, I'm focused, my biggest thing I'm doing today is operating this airplane, and I'm thinking about weather, I'm thinking about routing, I'm thinking about flight plan, I'm thinking about winds, icing, do we want to tanker fuel, what's the tailwind look like, these sorts of things, then I think you can safely operate the airplane. If you're waking up early because you have to turn a contract around, you have a phone call that you need to do, you're going to do another phone call on the way to the airport, your mind isn't in the game. And so you can't do 2 things at once. You can't have 2 full-time jobs. You can't say, well, I'm a surgeon during the day and I'm also a stand-up comic in the evening and I work until 1 a.m. and then I'm back, in the operating room at 7 a.m. And so I think knowing those limitations, you have the opportunity to say, this is a day where I can operate it myself. But there's another time when you might say, I'm going to bring another pilot, and maybe they're doing all the flying, maybe they're on the right seat as a safety pilot. But I think it's important to know your limitations. So I think that's a really key thing. And the way I got into flying the CJs is pretty different than most, which was most folks who are owner operators buy one, they go to flight safety, the FAA mandates, along with insurance, to your point, 25 hours of SOE, supervised operational experience, I believe, with another pilot. So they're in the left seat with a kind of an instructor or mentor pilot in the right seat, and really are getting coached into getting comfortable with the airplane. But the challenge for those folks is that they need to continually raise the bar on themselves, and then they're experiencing a lot of things for the first time down the road, which is more challenging. Yeah. So when I was first flying in the Citation, it was for FlightAware work. We're doing 4 legs a day, and I had a full-time pilot. So I have 1,000 hours flying with him, which set a really high bar in the base case. And then by the time I was flying by myself, I had seen most of the things that you're gonna see by yourself. And so it was a little easier for me in that regard because I wasn't having to figure it out as I went. And so by the time I was flying by myself, I had a good sense of what's going to be difficult, what has risks associated. And so, flying into Dulles, for example, and they're changing your arrival and the winds are gusting 20 to 40 and you get a FADEC fault CAS message. Guess what? I'd had that before. I'd had all of these before, and I knew how serious it was, and or not really, given the scenario that I was in. And so there was no big surprises for me, and so that made it a little bit easier.
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate what you said about when you're a professional pilot. When you show up to fly, you're Daniel Baker, the pro pilot today, not Daniel Baker, the busy CEO,
right,
with 15 meetings, in the next 24 hours.
That stuff's less important, right?
Yeah, you have to be that way, and it's that mindset. So, and I know a lot of very, very good non-professional pilots who have that same approach, and they fly complex airplanes, Citation Mustangs, CJs, PC-12s, King Airs. These are sophisticated pieces of equipment. I mean, there's no difference really between a CJ2 Plus and a G550. They're flown the same. You have to do all the same things when you're in the simulator. It's you're flying a very complex piece of equipment. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I think the challenge with the insurance companies is it's such a small market. Right. And so you made the valid point about, well, it's actually as safe or safer in, depending on your perspective. But from the insurance company's perspective, like, how big is this market? Do they really want to investigate this? So I think they need to partner with the community.
They do.
Because I think the community would be excited about whether it be, having some standardization for Part 91, so for privately owned and operated airplanes, or whether it be around creating standards that are measured and gamified as more and more airplanes can get flight data off of the airplane, and people want to hit certain performance standards. So I think the end result would be if we can get lower insurance rates and have fewer incidents. And everyone's happy, right?
Well, and it's, the other thing too about decision making, right? We're always making decisions as pilots, when to go, when not to go, where to go, how high to go, how low to go, like all these things. When you're a private pilot, you really have some benefits that a professional pilot doesn't have. One, you're running your own schedule.
Right.
You decide when that meeting needs to happen or not happen, or now can this be a Zoom call now, right? With Zoom, but a professional pilot doesn't necessarily have that. I mean, they do to an extent of they're the final decision maker on to go or not go. But I've when I was a young professional pilot, I got myself into situations sometimes. In fact, one of my first Part 135 flights, when I was a brand new 135 pilot flying passengers, I was flying VFR in a Baron, and I was out. I think I was going from Vegas to Bakersfield, and passengers got late, passengers got delayed, and then weather was a little worse than predicted, and all these things start piling up, like you're talking about. And I found myself in a situation where I was approaching mountains, the Sierra Mountains, which are pretty high, and the ceilings were coming down, and I was a VFR only pilot. And so I'm like, okay, my window is now getting compressed. I'm descending, but I can't descend too much, or I'm going to be in terrain, in the terrain. And I got so low, I'm like, I got to climb. And so now I climb up into the weather, declare, and get an IFR clearance, which is already a violation. I had to do a NASA report and all that over this, and then I end up in icing with an airplane that doesn't have de-icing equipment.
Yeah.
So all of these things are going on because I was on someone else's schedule. I wasn't on my own schedule. If I was with my family on that same flight, I wouldn't have been there. I would have just waited. I would have spent the night and gone another day. And I think as that's why when you really look at data around single pilot operations and owner flown complex airplanes, it is safer. Because of the decision making.
And I think that can be fixed somewhat too, which is with communication. I think, I'm an optimist, but I think most people are really rational, and most people have aligned interests. And if you can tell someone, look, this storm is coming through, and if you can, rearrange your schedule, we leave a couple hours earlier, the flight's going to be way more pleasant. It'll be less bumpy. There's a way higher chance that we're going to get into the destination. I think people are accommodating of that. And I think that the fear of people are paying a lot of money for these charter flights, and they don't, the crew and the company doesn't want to disappoint them. And so there's kind of misaligned incentives around that, when really I think in many cases, the passengers would say, just tell me, I can be accommodating. They want to have a good experience as well. But I agree with you. You can create those pressures because of, wanting to fulfill on people's expectations and not wanting to have to communicate bad news.
Yeah, I think one of the things we do a really bad job in our business or in the industry is the perceived pressure, right? The pressure we put on ourselves. And it's really easy if I'm, Daniel Baker's pilot and you say we need to go, I feel that's a real pressure that I feel from the passengers or the owner of the airplane or whomever it is. But sometimes it's not. Sometimes my job is to get a flight done. I'm actually putting that pressure on myself, and it's something we need to recognize in ourselves too. And we're making these decisions on when and when to fly.
Yeah, I agree. I think the perceived pressure is also a lack of communication, because you could have a situation where, I told you, hey, I really need to be off at 4:00. The weather's not good. You're stressing out about it as the pilot. And then maybe I'm running late and, pushing myself to then get there at 4. And if you had just called me and said, hey, this line of thunderstorms is coming through, and go, geez, if I could just get dinner, then that would solve my problem. And then we'll depart at 6. I think there are circumstances, maybe that's not the norm, but my point is to perceive pressure, having open communication could actually make everybody happier.
This is exactly the conversation I was having with my wife about everything.
Well, I also think is in your story, a challenge that, you saw that all young pilots see is that as you get started, you're flying much less capable airplanes, right? Your climb performance was not nearly as good as, what you fly now in the Gulfstreams, right? You didn't have de-icing equipment. I used to have a turbo normalized G36 Bonanza, which is more of a complicated airplane than the Citation, right? Because you're having to manage like lean of peak and cowl flaps and different fuel pumps and de-icing pumps and high and low versus, in the jets, if you enter icing, you're just like, bleed air, gunk.
Yep.
And
or it just turns on itself.
Right. So you're flying fancier stuff, So case in point, I'm having to manually turn on the de-icing equipment. And so as you get longer, further into your journey, not only do you, the kind of the cruel irony is you have more experience and you have better equipment.
Yeah, that's cool. I want to talk a little bit about the future of aviation technology. There's a lot of limitations. I think one of the things I'd like to hear from you about is what's a future of ATC tracking, and I don't really want to dig into aviation accidents, but when the Malaysia, flight 370 went missing, the public is like, how is this possible? And they don't realize the limitations right now. When you're over water, it's even, if you even look at FlightAware, it says predicted, or I think it says predicted or estimated where the airplane is. We don't actually know where it is.
Well, the good news is that FlightAware has partnered with a company called Aviation, which is a joint venture initially of Iridium, the satellite constellation company, and Nav Canada. And they put ADS-B receivers like FlightAware makes on the ground on Iridium's next generation of satellites. And so in the case that you're describing where FlightAware says estimated, FlightAware actually has real-time positions now from that airplane. This is new. This is just in the last few years. And that is a commercial service that FlightAware can sell to the airlines using this satellite data. And so the industry has really evolved and made improvements since Malaysia 370.
Does the aircraft require equipment to be installed on as well?
Just the normal top and bottom, like the diversity ADS-B antenna. So what's already required to operate in most of North America and Europe and the dense parts of Asia, for example, that's all you need. And so that's kind of the cool thing about the technology, which is, go to an airline and say, oh, we have a solution for you. You just need to get this STC and install it on 400 airplanes, right? Good luck. Versus you can say, hey, look at this screen. I already have all this data over the Atlantic and the Pacific. And so it kind of solves two problems. One is, obviously, it knows where the airplanes are. But it also means if you're not getting data from an airplane, that is a problem, right? So one of the challenges with Malaysia 370 was that, number one, the kind of lost track of the aircraft on an international airspace border. And second, the flight tracking technology that the airline was using at the time was used to losing touch with the airplane for extended periods. And so it was not abnormal to not be getting position reports. Whereas now with FlightAware and with Aviation data, anywhere in the world, that can be an alert if you don't get a position from an airplane for a couple of minutes, because that's an abnormality. And so it solves both the tracking, but also one of the big challenges with the Malaysia 370 was if you don't start looking for something for hours, and this thing can go 600 miles per hour, right? It gets an incredibly huge search area very quickly, versus if you're notified 3 minutes in, and you realize maybe in 5 or 10 minutes that you have a problem, that search area is a lot smaller.
What do you think? I mean, you're at the end of the day, you're a software guy.
Yeah.
And AI everyone's talking about it. It's coming after us. Where does it exist in aviation? And like, what are the things that where are we going to see AI in aviation first?
Yeah, I think we're starting to see it in a way that maybe doesn't get enough attention, which is a lot of turboprops you can buy today, all the way up to the Cirrus Vision Jet, have Garmin AI in there, which is if the pilot is incapacitated, you can hit a button in the airplane. It will find an airport nearby. It will consider terrain. It'll consider weather. It'll squawk emergency. It'll make radio calls. It will descend, drop the gear, land on the center line. Yeah. That is the biggest type of AI that we've seen in aviation, which I think is just, it's incredible. And to our point about FAA, it's even more incredible they got it certified, right? And so maybe because of, the emergency nature of it. So I think we're starting to see it now. And I think that is having bigger impacts than maybe people are realizing, which is people are getting comfortable in different types of airplanes. Yeah. The single pilot issue that we discussed, insurance companies are concerned about age. This can be a real solution to those problems.
I agree. I mean, these airplanes can do it right now. Like you talk about safety, hitting a button and having the airplane, that the Garmin system is amazing.
But I would say that for, like, if I think about your business, it is, the actual, once you're in the airplane, you're fueled, you're filed, everybody's on board, that's a relatively straight through process versus the process of getting to that point, right? Figuring out routes, airports, car services, alternates. I mean, I'm sure you have just an army, right, that's needed to get a single flight to be dispatched. And I can see that as being, on the business aviation side, very disruptive. If you can have an AI system that can really suss out the best options and take away a lot of that busy work. Yeah. And I think where that's even more impactful is probably in the airline space. And one of the things I've observed with FlightAware's customers is they are really trying to prevent delays and disruptions, right? And so to the extent that they can use FlightAware to identify a potential problem, to try to prevent a delay or cancellation, they're excited about it. But they have to spend so much time watching, figuring out, looking, that there's not always enough time to resolve a service disruption, right? When you realize that an airplane's going to be tremendously late, when you realize a flight is diverting, those sorts of things. If you could have AI start to do this like disruption management for you, where it's suddenly doing a complete change of all the gate allocations, it's like redone the entire schedule to be more optimal, then maybe one plane went out of service, but it's like AI said, oh wow, we can re-optimize all of this entire schedule, and I've moved 700 people's hotel rooms, crew, for the next few days. And if it can do all that, those tasks are not achievable right now because rescheduling the crew, changing their accommodations, all that is just a tremendous amount of work. And so I think that is going to be very impactful when suddenly AI is able to say, hey, you are a dispatcher, here's a problem, here are the 3 options I can present, and each option might have like 1,000 tasks that it's going to have to do. You can, using some business logic, work with your colleagues and make a decision, and then it can execute. I think that could be tremendously impactful to the reliability of travel.
I'm excited about it. We're deep into research right now with our company and how small things, right, that we can do just to support business operations. I mean, AI is like, a lot of people are concerned about it, but really, like, humans have always sought ways to make our lives easier, right? When we're cavemen making tools to crack open a coconut on an island, right?
Right.
Like, that's a form of, it's artificial. It's not, biological, right? So we've done this. An autopilot in an airplane is there to enhance the safety and the situational awareness, right? It's a machine that's doing a job that a human used to do.
Yeah, I think the thing that probably worries some people and that makes it a little more complicated is when you get into, these advanced systems where, let's say you're testing it, it behaves in some way that you didn't like, you didn't anticipate, and it's not clear why. Right. And we've seen that at FlightAware, and that was a totally new type of technology, which is, software companies are all over bugs and finding bugs and fixing bugs, and it will always go through the code that you wrote in the order that you wrote it with, and whatnot. And to suddenly be in an environment where a customer says, hey, we have a question about why this ETA was wrong, and it's not clear what the answer was or how you got there. And so the, FlightAware's team has gotten a lot better at that, but I could envision that, I expect the autopilot to work exactly as I've anticipated and told it to. And so to the point where it starts making some surprise decisions, it's a little more like driving a Tesla with full self-driving, where it's not like I'm telling it what to do. I'm telling it what mission I want to achieve, right? I'm like, okay, car, I want to go to the grocery store, and it can make some decisions around, roundabouts and four-way stops and lane changes and stuff that, like, why did it decide to do that? I have no idea. Maybe it knows something I don't. Maybe I know something it doesn't.
There's a big difference between making decisions and misprogramming something, right? We've all had the experience of, like, why is the airplane doing this?
It's a bad feeling.
Right? It happens to all of us. Like, what is it doing now?
Right.
And it's always our error. We didn't put
every time.
We didn't put something in the box right? So it's doing what we told it to do.
Absolutely. And like when you can't arm a mode, like you can't arm approach mode, it's never that your system has failed. There's something wrong there. 100%. But it's good to be aware of that as well. Like if you can't arm a mode, stop the approach because something's going on.
Absolutely. So is there anything that bothers you about trends you're seeing in the future of aviation and kind of what's coming up next?
Well, I think a general concern that I have is that aviation is an industry that is unapproachable, and it's gotten worse over time. And I think you have, for example, 9/11, suddenly the fences got higher, and suddenly we have barbed wire, and fewer airports are accessible, and you can't go in and see the pilots anymore. I'm not saying these are bad policy decisions or security decisions. I'm just saying that if you think about, for example, my story about the first time I got to get on this turboprop airliner and walk across a ramp, that's not really commonplace anymore. You're going to have a jetway, and there's going to be a cockpit door, and I think that it's really tough for young people to know where to start and to get access to it and to taste it just a little bit. And it's getting even more expensive. And so that's a tough combination. And I think that one of the things we talked about the kind of the U.S., the FAA and the pilot system and how all this works is that kind of freedom and flexibility. And that's true, but to the extent that it's getting harder to get on an airport or to learn to fly or to pay for it, that's a big concern about it.
It's become more mysterious, aviation, right? When you're a kid, I had the same experience when I was a kid. I actually went and got a tour of the cockpit on the way to Hawaii when I was 8 years old with my dad.
And you'll never forget it.
And I'm like, it was a really cool experience and I won't forget it, but that doesn't happen anymore. So there's this mystery behind it. It's, people don't, and they get on an airplane and they fly somewhere and they treat it more like a bus. Like I'm getting on the bus to go from here to there.
You're going from a mall to a bus to a mall.
And it's people don't see the romantic side of it. They don't have the feeling and and you kind of need that to become a pilot, right? So
absolutely.
I feel like there's a resurgence with pilots right now. And I think there's like I call it the Top Gun effect. There was a huge surge in new pilots when the first.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. This is a thing.
Okay.
And there was a lot of kids when they went and watch that movie and like, I want to be a pilot.
Great.
So there's a lot of students right now training. So
and I've enjoyed doing. Are you familiar with EA Young Eagles? Where so you give kids a ride in a small airplane and they get to take the controls and all that. And in my perspective, it's not only an opportunity to expose them to the possibility of being a pilot, but I like to point out that who made the different parts, that this is software and this is or this is mechanical, and just expose people to all these opportunities and show, this is FBO and this is a military hangar and this is a corporate flight department. And because my point about the fence, if you're on the other side of the fence, you don't know that any of that's happening. But it's not like even there's just one job being a pilot, right? There's like 700 career opportunities that are available, right?
There's so much to do, yeah.
And who would have thought that you could be a software guy at home on a laptop, and that's your entrance into aviation, right? I didn't even necessarily see that, and I was doing it. So I think that's my concern, which is the industry has so much potential, and people need it needs to be more accessible, whether it be from an educational perspective, from a cost perspective, and I think if you want it to be everything that we're envisioning with people traveling on eVTOLs and now space transport and whatnot, it needs to recruit and continue to recruit the best and the brightest next generation.
So, you're a pilot, you're an entrepreneur, you're a software engineer. You have a lot of experience. Even though you're still a really young guy, I'm sure there's going to be a lot that comes out of you in the next few years. But what advice are you going to give the kids coming into the business and somebody that want to do something entrepreneurial in aviation? Where do they start?
Well, I think that one thing that's important to remember is that we were joking about FlightAware as an overnight success after 20 years. I think that the media and movies and whatnot portray startups as something that you have an amazing idea, you start to work on it, and then the next week you're in a high rise with 400 people, and you're getting ready for your IPO, and recognizing that it's a really long road. There's a lot of bumps along the road, and I've learned more from mistakes and failures than I have from FlightAware's successes. And so to go in it from the perspective of this is something I'm going to be deeply passionate and working hard on for a long time, as opposed to wanting a quick win. I think in general that's important for entrepreneurs. But one thing I think it's cool that should excite people about getting into aviation is that it's a big enough industry that there's a lot of commercial opportunity, but it is not oil and gas. It is not healthcare, right? It is not U.S. agriculture, and so that's in some ways a good thing. And what I mean is, it would not be possible, for example, for a FlightAware sized company to revolutionize the energy industry or to revolutionize the agriculture system. Just because there's so many people working on it, the scale is just so enormous. Aviation is big enough that you can have a huge commercial opportunity, but small enough that entrepreneurs can enter it, have a big impact, be big players, be a big fish in a relatively small pond. And so if you can combine your willingness to do it for a long period with, recognizing you're not going to have that change after a year, right?
You got to be ready to grind.
Right. The number of airlines using FlightAware operationally after 5 years was zero.
Right.
It does ramp quickly towards the end, but it's getting that first one is really hard. But you can have a really big impact in this space. And one of the things that I've really enjoyed about it is there are a lot of industries where people are in that industry because they had a job, or they were given some offer to get involved in it, or it made sense. Aviation is an industry where it feels like everyone's in it because they want to be in that industry. They're 100%. Passionate about it. They're excited about it. Everyone, grew up with the story like you have or like I have about how they got.
I love our industry. There's so much opportunity, I think, for entrepreneurs, and there's so many different things to do in our business. And I on the business side of aviation, which I'm not an airline guy. I've been in business aviation almost my whole career. It's a really small community, and we know it's, and I like that. I like knowing, all of our, all the people we do business with, and Ben and Cyrus. You're friends with Ben and Cyrus from Jet Aviva, and I've known those guys since we started our business together, and they're still really good friends, and it's just a cool industry, and I encourage people to get into it.
I agree, and I think that some advice as well is, although that smallness is helpful because you work with the same people and you're passionate, people need to recognize that reputation is really important. And so if you show up when you say you're going to, and you fulfill on your commitments, and you're honest, that word will get around. If that's not the case, that word will get around quicker.
Exactly.
So it's a small industry in that sense.
I like that about it. The good people are the good people, and the ones that aren't.
Yeah, that's right. And there aren't people who have been in it for a very long time and have had a lot of success who aren't honest and ethical in their business. And so that's it, because of the size, it weeds it out. And because people get into it almost exclusively because they're excited about it, right? Not because they're looking for a commercial opportunity.
Yeah. Well, Daniel, hey man, you've done some pretty amazing things, and I appreciate all the hard work and what you've put into FlightAware and to become what it is today. And I think the world really appreciates it. You've helped a lot of people. And I thank you very much for coming on the Flight Club podcast. You've been an amazing guest, and there's a lot here. I mean, we could go on for another hour, I think, but I really appreciate you coming on. Is there anything else you want to say to our aviators out there?
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for all your kind words. It's genuinely just a passion and an honor to be able to be in this industry, and just a privilege to have had the opportunities that I've had to have the impact that I've had. And so I invite everyone to see how they can get engaged in aviation. And I think there's so many opportunities out there, and we're at such a pivotal time with regard to space travel and to eVTOLs and to what airspace looks like, and the next generation of every type of technology, that it's a really fun time to have the opportunity to have a big impact.
Yeah, be curious, get involved.
That's
I love
right.
it. Daniel, thanks for being on Flight Club.
Thank you.